Welcome to The Debate. You know, when a structural engineer looks at a skyscraper, they don't marvel at how hard the steel is working to hold up the building.
Right, they just look at the finished product.
Exactly. They don't applaud the beams for pulling all-nighters or sweating under the pressure. If the steel is audibly groaning under the weight of the floors above it, well, that is fundamentally a design flaw.
Yeah, the building shouldn't be fighting just to stand up.
Right. The architecture itself should distribute the weight effortlessly. And that, I think, perfectly captures the architectural tension we are exploring today.
Which is this idea of the fundamental pacing of entrepreneurship, right? Especially tailored for small business owners who, really prioritize that deep, authentic customer care.
Yes. And we are drawing our insights today entirely from Preeti Balasubramanian's book, The Calm Business Reset. The core question we're examining is really, is this grueling, chaotic hustle culture an absolutely necessary phase to generate momentum?
Or, on the flip side, is building a foundation of calm growth, like engineering the systems from day one, is that the only truly viable path to long-term survival?
Exactly.
And I'll actually be defending the position that while calm is a beautiful end state to aspire to, the raw effort, the constant saying yes to everything, and the somewhat chaotic addition of new offers are actually critical.
You don't think they're flaws?
Not at all. They're necessary mechanisms. They are how a founder discovers a business's true value and, achieves that initial liftoff.
Well, I am taking the exact opposite stance. I will argue that hustle culture is a dangerous myth. It inevitably traps founders in what Balasubramanian terms a heavy business.
A heavy business, right.
Yeah. I'm championing the position that sustainable success has to be deliberately built on systems, structured support, and frankly, fiercely protected founder energy right from the start.
Well, let's start right there with this idea of a heavy business. If we look closely at the text, the author actually defines it not as a failure, but as a growth story that outgrew its original systems.
Which is a crucial distinction, yes.
Right. Because you cannot outgrow systems unless you are actively growing. I argue that early-stage entrepreneurs, they have to rely on raw effort because they simply do not yet have the data.
The data to know what to systemize?
Exactly. They don't know what repeats often enough yet. The hustle phase is a period of necessary empirical discovery. Saying yes too often, adding bespoke offers, this is how you figure out what the market actually wants to pay for.
Hustle as the engine of discovery.
Yeah. You have to generate the raw material before you can refine it.
I mean, I understand the romantic appeal of that startup grind, but we have to look at the actual cost of that discovery method. Exhaustion is not the required price of ambition.
But it's often the reality.
But it builds a heavy business. Let's define what that actually looks like in practice. It's the graphic designer whose revenue has doubled, but she hasn't slept a full weekend in 6 months.
Because she's doing custom work.
Exactly. Every single client requires a totally custom from-scratch onboarding process. Revenue might be growing, but the pressure, the anxiety, the deadlines, they're growing right alongside it. Success just starts costing more than it should.
But the designer in your example is making money. She's surviving.
Surviving, yes, but at what cost? The text explicitly points out that doing more is the default response to slow growth, but it is fundamentally a flawed response.
So what's the alternative then?
This is why the material introduces what it calls the ease equation. Systems plus support equals sustainable success. When systems, like an automated onboarding questionnaire, are missing, everything depends on the founder's memory.
Okay, but...
And when support is missing, everything depends entirely on the founder's manual effort. Building a business that relies on the flawless memory and infinite stamina of one human being, well, it isn't a rite of passage, it's a structural vulnerability.
If that designer gets the flu, her entire business collapses.
100%.
Okay, let's talk about the reality of the early stage, because this is where the theory, hits the road. You talk about stamina and memory as vulnerabilities, but the agility to pivot without consulting a 50-page standard operating procedure manual is the primary advantage of a small business.
Sure, but
If I'm a sole proprietor making $50,000 a year, how on earth do I afford to sit back and build support before I hustle to get the cash flow?
Well, support doesn't just mean a payroll of full-time employees. Support is intentional design. Because that agility you're praising, it's an advantage only until it becomes a massive energy leak.
An energy leak?
Yeah, the text is brilliant in identifying how these hidden costs manifest. They don't announce themselves loudly. They show up as constant context switching, unfinished tasks, and repeated decision-making.
Explain what you mean by energy leak, because to me, jumping from task to task is just called running a business.
Think of your brain like a computer's RAM. If you have one program open, the computer runs lightning fast. But hustle culture tells you to open 50 browser tabs at once.
Right. The marketer, the service provider, the admin.
Exactly. You're trying to remember to email client A back, drafting a proposal for client B, and worrying about a late invoice from client C. Individually, manageable, but having those 50 open tabs running in the background completely drains the operating system.
You start lagging.
You drop the ball. The text states clearly, your business does not need more of your energy. It needs better direction for it. You're using your brain to store information instead of using it to generate value.
Wait, you're calling chaos an energy leak? I call it a feature of adaptability.
How so?
What the text labels as unclear priorities and context switching, I categorize as the necessary survival instincts of an early-stage venture. You say unfinished tasks are an energy leak. I say an unfinished task is often a byproduct of a founder rightly dropping a low-value activity to, pivot and seize a high-value opportunity.
That's a very generous interpretation of getting distracted.
But it's true. If they were locked into a rigid, calm system, say a perfectly time-blocked calendar, they might completely ignore that golden opportunity because it wasn't on their schedule between 2 and 3 p.m.
I see why you think that. But you're assuming the pivot is always toward a golden opportunity. Usually, it's just a pivot toward a loud distraction. Let me give you a different perspective.
Okay.
If a business is a bucket, hustle culture tells us to just turn the hose on full blast. But context switching and repeated decision-making are holes in that bucket. Pouring more raw effort doesn't fix the leaks, it just wastes water.
But you need the water to figure out where the holes are.
You cannot build a sustainable business on unsustainable energy. When you rely on reactive agility instead of deliberate clarity, you might catch a few unexpected opportunities, sure, but you do so at the cost of your baseline operational stability. Eventually, the system crashes.
That stability argument makes sense on paper. But if you're an entrepreneur, you know that small business owners win on one thing above all else: the client experience.
Of course.
I argue that relying strictly on this ease equation, trying to systemize every single interaction, it can completely strip away the highly personalized, chaotic but caring hustle that actually wins those devoted clients in the first place.
Systemization doesn't mean you stop caring.
Let me give you a real-world example. A founder realizes at 3 a.m. that a client's website launch is missing a critical integration. They stay up, manually code the fix, and email the client at 6 a.m. saying, "Hey, caught this, handled it for you."
The heroic save.
Exactly. That raw effort is what makes the business memorable. The client is a fan for life. Systems can feel incredibly sterile. Hustle feels like authentic care.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. You can't just slap the word bespoke onto something to justify disorganized scrambling.
It's not disorganized, it's responsive.
But the text provides a direct rebuttal to that romanticized view. It notes, people may forget what you delivered. They remember how it felt to work with you. How does it actually feel to work with a chaotic business on a daily basis? It feels unpredictable. It breeds anxiety. Sure, you saved the day at 3 a.m., but why was the integration missed in the first place? Probably because the founder was context switching between 50 tabs and forgot a step.
It was missed because they were moving fast and breaking things, which is how innovation happens.
But exceptional client experience doesn't come from a cycle of failing and then heroically saving the day. It comes from clarity, consistency, and proactive care. The text explicitly says, systems create ease, not rigidity.
But consistency is very often just a polite corporate word for standardizing the client's experience into a sterile assembly line.
Not at all. The text advises a very simple rule. If you have done it twice, you can systemize it. How can a founder provide true care if they are redoing the same process from scratch every single time?
By paying attention to the specific client in front of them.
But they're spending energy that should have been saved for the actual creative work. Systemizing the predictable elements of the client journey is exactly what protects the founder's energy so they can be like 100% present when it matters.
Doing something twice is an incredibly small sample size, though. If you systemize a process after only 2 iterations, you risk hardwiring your own mistakes.
Or you prevent future ones.
The hustle phase, doing it manually 20, 30, 50 times, is how you find all the weird edge cases. It's how you learn the subtle nuances of what different clients actually need. The manual effort isn't a waste of energy. It is raw, necessary market research.
It becomes wasted energy when the founder becomes the absolute bottleneck for all growth, which really shifts us from the immediate client experience to the long-term survival of the business.
Right. The compounding effect.
Yes, you are advocating for remaining in this chaotic discovery phase for extended periods. But the text warns us about the compounding toxic effect of this. It states, a business that grows without structure will eventually grow into strain.
But strain is a natural byproduct of expansion. The text observes that founders constantly default to adding new offers and trying new strategies. Why? Because markets change, because frankly, cash flow requires it sometimes.
But chaotic growth is still chaotic.
Chaotic growth is still growth. It puts money in the bank. My genuine concern here is that if an entrepreneur obsesses over building perfectly calm support structures too early, they will move too slowly. They'll miss their crucial window of opportunity.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning. Telling an entrepreneur they can't afford to pause and build support until they are overwhelmed is like saying you shouldn't buy insurance until your house is already on fire.
I'm not saying wait for fire. I'm saying don't build a massive, complex infrastructure for a business that hasn't proven it can survive the winter yet.
But if you don't lay the foundation, the winter will destroy it anyway. Hustle culture tricks us into equating motion with progress. Adding another offer, saying yes to an out-of-scope client, more, does not always create momentum.
It creates cash.
It creates dilution. You spread your resources so thin that everything becomes mediocre. The text presents a stark dichotomy here. Calm growth compounds, chaotic growth collapses.
I think we have to acknowledge the gritty reality that many incredibly successful, enduring businesses were forged in the fire of completely unsustainable effort. Amazon, local bakeries, they started with founders working insane hours.
But they didn't stay there.
No, but the messy, raw effort phase of a heavy business is a necessary crucible. It forces you to find out what you are truly capable of. You can't intelligently design a system to prevent a breakdown if you've never experienced the stress testing of your own capacity.
But why must we demand that founders break themselves just to find out where the structural limits are? Why is suffering a prerequisite for success?
It's not suffering, it's just hard work.
It is suffering when your health degrades because your energy is unprotected. The entire premise of the Calm Business Reset is that treating the founder's energy as an endless renewable fuel source is a massive strategic failure.
I agree. Energy is finite.
Right. So the sooner you stop doing everything, the sooner your business can grow beyond you. Hustle culture promises future peace in exchange for current suffering. Just grind for 3 more years and then you can relax.
Which rarely happens.
Never happens. The habits of hustle become ingrained. You never get the calm unless you deliberately construct it.
Okay, we may remain at odds regarding the absolute necessity of that initial trial by fire. But I think we arrive at a powerful point of convergence here.
Oh.
We actually both agree on one fundamental truth embedded in the source material. When a business starts feeling heavy, it is a definitive, undeniable signal.
Yes, exactly. That heaviness, that feeling of waking up and dreading your own client roster, or realizing that doubling your revenue just means doubling your stress, it isn't a sign of personal failure.
No, it's an operational signal.
It is the steel beams of the skyscraper groaning. It means the business has outgrown its current model and absolutely demands a shift toward real systems and support.
Right. The weight itself is the metric. It tells you the raw discovery phase is over and the architectural phase must begin. Stating in the chaos once the business feels heavy is a choice, and it will invariably lead to collapse.
And that is exactly where the text offers a very practical off-ramp from the chaos, the 90-day ease plan. For anyone listening who feels that heaviness right now, this isn't about blowing up your business. It's essentially a tactical pause.
Break that down practically. What does a tactical pause look like for someone who relies on constant momentum to pay their mortgage?
It means taking 90 days where your primary goal is not expansion. You stop launching new offers. You stop chasing new channels. Instead, you audit the business. You identify exactly where your energy is leaking.
Finding those 50 browser tabs.
Exactly. Then you choose refinement over relentless expansion. You implement the ease equation specifically for those leaks. It asks founders to decide whether we are going to navigate our roles by constantly stretching until we snap or by swaying.
Swaying?
Swaying means being fully, powerfully present in one role at a time, supported by systems that keep the rest of the business running while you do.
It really requires looking at business growth through dual lenses, doesn't it? You have to recognize and honor the aggressive ambition required to start something from nothing, but you also have to deeply respect the sustainable architecture required to make it endure.
Which brings us right back to our original metaphor. If you want to build a shack, you can do it with a hammer, some nails, and sheer stubborn willpower.
But not a skyscraper.
No. A business that stands tall, supports your life, and serves your clients with unwavering consistency, you cannot rely on the brute force of the muddy construction site forever. Eventually, you have to let the architecture do the heavy lifting. The choice of pacing, whether you stretch or sway, is ultimately yours. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.